learning today a bit more about Prince's death 1 week ago. Today, inside of his Paisley Park studio, a law enforcement source reveals to CNN that there were prescription pain medications, specifically opioid pills, found on the music icon when he was found in his elevator at the time of his death, as well as somewhere within his Paisley Park home. We also know federal drug enforcement agents, DEA, they're now in there. They're part of the investigation. Meantime, the health scare that prompted that emergency plane landing just about a week before that Prince was on that plane, investigators now believe it was because of a bad reaction to pain medication. The law enforcement source says Prince was unresponsive when his private plane landed. Paramedics on the scene treated him for a potential overdose of pain meds. And then 6 days later, Prince was pronounced dead. With me now, Darren Kavanoki, a certified interventionist and attorney. He's also the host of Deadly Sins on the Investigation Discovery Channel. He joins me. He has also worked with Heather Hayes, an interventionist with more than 30 years working with addictions and disorders. She's also a criminal profiler. So welcome to both of you. And, you know, let's just be clear off the top. There's so much we don't know. So nobody's going to jump to conclusions here. We're just going to focus on the facts. And the facts are the opioid meds found on him in his house, and the fact that, you know, he was treated, he was unresponsive on that plane when they had to make that emergency landing. What, Darren, to you first, what does that tell you, and what exactly is an opioid?
Well, when we're talking about opioids, you're talking about a class of drugs that frankly, it's the street drug that's most closely related to it is heroin. We're talking about the opiate family of medication. And what's so incredibly dangerous, and I'm so glad that we're having this conversation, Brooke, addiction is costing Americans over $700 billion a year. It's a massive, massive problem. And the number of cases that I've personally worked with where people have started off seeking treatment because of a legitimate medical problem, and it's blossomed into full-blown addiction, it's a very, very common scenario.
So beyond heroin, Heather, what else could an opioid, what else could someone be taking?
Any of the pain pills. They could be taking Percodan, Oxycontin, Percocet, Vicodin. There's a whole array of opiates, and mostly they're given for pain, but they're very addictive, and the overdose potential is very high.
How does one, I mean, we've talked about this so much in the past here, but how does one get addicted to one of these meds? How quickly can that happen?
Oh, it can happen incredibly quickly, Brooke, and what the problem really becomes is one of tolerance, where because somebody is taking a particular dose, the body will become acclimated to that particular dose, and the person requires more and more of the drug in order to get relief. And what ultimately can happen is that the addiction part demands more and more of that substance, like a drowning person needs air. But unfortunately, the body's physical organs just can't keep up with that pace, and that's where we get into a potential fatal overdose situation.
Well, Heather, what about the fact that we know that the plane made the emergency landing, we know he was unresponsive, we know he had to be revived. So when paramedics rush in, what does that revival process even look like? What would they have done?
What they would have done is they would have given a medication called Narcan, which actually stops the opiates from working on the receptor site. So it brings the person out of the overdose so that their respiration picks back up, their vital signs pick back up, but it's a short fix. So what would have needed to have happened would have then been time for Prince to get treatment. You know, addiction, and when we have overdoses, that's a call for action. And what we're seeing here is there was a huge opportunity. He had an overdose. We were aware that it had happened, and that would have been the time to then, after that, come in and really get him some help. Just because you've treated an overdose doesn't mean you've treated the addiction, and people are more likely, if they don't get the proper withdrawal off of the opiates, to overdose again.
Is it even possible
Brooke,
that he would? Let me just jump in and ask this. We know he was a Jehovah's Witness. We know that because of that, I think that means you wouldn't take a blood transfusion, which perhaps would mean he could say no to something like hip surgery. I know he had hip issues. Perhaps one could think you were doing the right thing by taking some pain meds, not thinking anything nefariously. Perhaps an addiction could happen. Again, we don't really know. But I don't know. I guess I'm just trying to wrap my head around what's possible. Darren, go ahead. What were you going to say?
No, that unfortunately, with people that are celebrities and high net worth individuals, they're oftentimes in the aftermath of, let's say, that plane experience where there was an overdose. There's often they're surrounded by people who aren't supportive of the kind of treatment that Heather was describing, and we see this play out over and over and over again. And in terms of what you're trying to wrap your head around, Brooke, it's quite simply is that when people are prescribed these drugs for legitimate medical purposes, it just plays out so frequently where they become tolerant and take more and more and more of the drug to achieve the relief from the pain, but unfortunately the body just can't take it anymore.
I know it's still a couple of weeks potentially for the toxicology reports to come out. We'll continue the conversation then. Again, we just don't know so much. Darren and Heather, thank you both very much.
Thanks.